cities turn to sand, her name returns in moments of resistance. Artists revive her. Writers search for her footprints. A vow not to wash until victory. It sounds absurd to some, but to those who've had to claw their way through injustice, it makes perfect sense. Rhodogun was never about glamour. She was about grit. And in the end, it was the dust that crowned her, not gold. Dust. The same substance emperors try to escape in death, yet the very thing she wore like a badge of honour. She was forgotten by kings, ignored by chroniclers, but remembered by the dust. And that's where legends truly live, not in stone, but in soil. Before empires clashed and blood soaked the sand, before kings trembled at her name, Tomyris was simply a daughter of the wind, born to the raw, open steppe. The land she came from was not gilded in marble or echoing with philosophy. It was brutal, free, and endlessly vast. This was the world of the Massagetae, fierce nomadic horse archers who rode like spirits of the plains, their lives shaped by survival, honour, and war. We know little of Tomyris's childhood, but we can imagine the rhythm of it. She would have learned to ride before she could run, to shoot before she could speak in full sentences. Among the Massagetae, girls were not caged in tents or veiled by silence. They trained beside the boys, rode with the warriors, and grew up with iron in their blood. To lead, one had to bleed. And Tomyris, even as a young woman, bled for her people. Her tribe worshipped the sun and sky, lived off their herds, and buried their dead with weapons, ready for battle in the afterlife. They had no cities, no golden temples, but they had pride. And when enemies approached, they met them not with prayers, but with arrows. Tomyris likely came to power after the death of her husband, who may have ruled the tribe before her. But what's certain is that when the moment came, she didn't inherit leadership. She seized it. In a time when most women were considered property, Tomyris commanded an army. She negotiated with kings. She dared to speak as an equal. And if they didn't listen, she made them. She was more than a queen. She was Shahmat, the steppe's checkmate, a war chief in bronze and leather who would soon face the greatest empire on earth. But power, especially for a woman, never comes without consequence. As Tomyris began to solidify her rule, whispers grew louder. Across the mountains to the south, a king was watching. His name was Cyrus the Great, and he wanted more. The stage was set. The steppe wind howled, and Tomyris, daughter of warriors, would soon ride into legend. While Tomyris reigned over the open steppes, far to the south, a different kind of power was rising, structured, imperial, relentless. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had already conquered Lydia in the west and Babylon in the south. His banners flew over deserts, mountains, and cities where languages changed every few days' ride. But Cyrus wasn't done. He was a builder of empires, and every builder eventually eyes the horizon. To Cyrus, the Massagetae were a threat wrapped in opportunity. They weren't rich in gold or cities, but they controlled the northeastern frontier, and that meant access to key lands, resources and trade routes. More importantly, the Massagetae had something no empire could afford to ignore: pride. And pride, in Cyrus's eyes, could be bent or broken. But Cyrus also knew that brute force wasn't always the best first move. He had a reputation for cleverness, diplomacy, and strategic trickery. So he tried a different approach, one that kings before him had used to dissolve threats without a single drop of blood. He proposed marriage. According to ancient sources, notably Herodotus, Cyrus sent envoys to Tomyris offering an alliance through matrimony. On paper, it was a royal match, the great king of Persia and the warrior queen of the Massagetae. But Tomyris wasn't naive. She saw the proposal for what it was, not an offer of love or partnership, but a calculated attempt to absorb her people without a fight. She declined. and that rejection didn't sit well in the halls of Persepolis. With the diplomatic games over, Cyrus shifted to his favourite language: war. He ordered his army to cross the Araxes River, the natural barrier that separated Persia from the land of the Massagetae. He was going to take what Tomyris refused to give. But Tomyris was already preparing. She knew the terrain. She knew how her people fought, on horseback, fast and furious. And most of all, she knew Cyrus wasn't just coming for land. He was coming to crush a woman who dared to say no. The world's most powerful king had declared war, but he had no idea what kind of fury he had just awakened on the steppe. Cyrus the Great, master strategist and seasoned conqueror, believed he could outwit Tomyris. He had faced kings, crushed cities, and subdued nations. To him, the Massagetae were little more than wild nomads with fast horses and no cities to defend. He didn't realize he was stepping into the path of someone just as cunning and far more furious. Tomyris had warned him. After rejecting his marriage offer, she sent a clear message: "Cross the Araxes River, and you will regret it." But Cyrus crossed anyway, building a bridge of boats to carry his army into Massagetae land. Instead of striking immediately, Tomyris pulled her forces back, luring Cyrus deeper into unfamiliar terrain. The Persians found an abandoned camp, well stocked with food, and more importantly, wine, a luxury the nomadic Massagetae rarely indulged in. It was a baited trap, and Cyrus took it, perhaps thinking the enemy had panicked and fled. Inside the camp, he left a portion of his army under the command of General Harpagus, a trusted officer. As the Massagetae returned under the cover of night, they fell upon the drunk and unsuspecting Persians with deadly precision. The battle was brutal and swift. Among the dead was Spargapaises, Tomyris' son and a Massagetae commander. Accounts differ on what happened next. Some say Spargapaises was taken alive and, realizing his capture, begged for death and took his own life. Others claim he was killed in the fighting, but all agree. When news reached Tomyris, something inside her shattered, and then turned to steel. Her grief was volcanic, but her rage, that became legendary. She sent another message to Cyrus. This one wasn't a warning, it was a vow. "You may be a glutton for blood," she said, "but I swear I will give you your fill." She promised to make the ground run red with Persian blood, and her vengeance would not be quiet. Cyrus had taken her son. He had violated her land. Now he would meet not the queen of the Massagetae, but the mother of a slain warrior, and the last face he would ever see. The next battle would not be a skirmish. It would be an execution. The sun rose over the plains like a blade, sharp and blinding. Tomyris stood at the head of her army, no longer just a queen, but a storm given form. Her warriors, hardened by the nomadic life, painted their faces with ash and rage. This wasn't about politics anymore. This was about blood. Cyrus, for all his might, had underestimated the Massagetae. He assumed they would fight like the tribes he had conquered before, chaotic, uncoordinated, easy to crush. But Tomyris had spent her life among warriors. She understood how to strike, not blindly, but with precision. She rallied her forces for a full-scale assault on the Persian invaders. And this time, she wasn't holding back. The location of the final battle is lost to history, swallowed by the vastness of the steppe. But what's clear is that Tomyris launched a ferocious counterattack. Her cavalry swept across the plains like a tide of knives. They fired arrows from horseback, closed in with axes, and fought like people with nothing left to lose. The Persians, battle-hardened, disciplined, and experienced, weren't expecting this level of organized fury. Tomyris didn't just lead her troops, she fought beside them. Her presence on the battlefield ignited her warriors like wildfire. Every strike was driven by vengeance. Every charge was an answer to her son's death. Cyrus tried to hold the line, but it shattered. The Persians were routed. Many died where they stood. Others fled into the endless grasslands, only to be hunted down. And Cyrus the Great, the man who had conquered Babylon, Lydia, and nearly the known world, fell in the chaos. Whether he was slain in combat or captured and executed depends on the version told. But either way, he died on Tomyris's terms. What came next is infamous. According to Herodotus, Tomyris found Cyrus's body on the battlefield, ordered his head severed, and then, in a final act of symbolic revenge, submerged it in a wineskin filled with human blood. "Drink your fill," she said, "of the blood you thirsted for." Was it historical fact or poetic embellishment? Maybe both. But it didn't matter. The message was eternal. Tomyris was not to be conquered. When the dust settled and the grass drank deep the blood of empire, Tomyris stood victorious. A warrior queen who had done what no king or army before her could. She brought Cyrus the Great to his end. News of the defeat sent shockwaves across the ancient world. The mighty Achaemenid Empire, thought to be unstoppable, had been humiliated by a woman from the steppes. The Persians did their best to downplay the loss, but the death of their founder couldn't be ignored. Cyrus's body was eventually returned and buried with honour in the royal tomb at Pasargadae. Yet the stain of his final defeat would linger like a wound on the empire's legacy. For Tomyris and the Massagetæ, however, the victory was more than revenge. It was a declaration. They had defended their sovereignty not just with weapons, but with dignity. Tomyris had stood up to the world's most powerful ruler, and she hadn't just survived, she had triumphed. And then she vanished from history. No records survive detailing her later years, her death, or any successors she may have appointed. It's as if, after taking her vengeance, Tomyris simply rode back into the horizon and allowed the wind to carry her legend forward. In the centuries that followed, historians, poets, and chroniclers would try to fill in the blanks, turning her into a symbol as much as a woman. To the Persians, her name was a bitter reminder. To the Greeks, she was a paradox, a barbarian who displayed more nobility than many kings. And to the peoples of Central Asia, Tomyris became folklore, a ghostly queen who rides through the steppe, fierce and unbending, with a sword that remembers. Her legacy would inspire countless depictions across cultures. Medieval manuscripts portrayed her in regal armour. Renaissance paintings imagined her towering over Cyrus's corpse. In every age, she became what people needed: a mother avenger, a wild queen, a lesson in hubris, or a symbol of feminine power. But one truth cuts through the myth. She changed history. Tomyris didn't inherit a throne. She forged it in fire and fury. And for one brief, unforgettable moment, the Steppe Queen proved that not all empires rise. Some fall to the hooves of warriors who ride with vengeance in their hearts. Much of what we know about Tomyris comes not from local Massagetæ records. They left no stone tablets or royal archives, but from the pen of a Greek, Herodotus, often called the father of history. Writing a century after her time, he immortalized Tomyris in his histories, casting her as a warrior queen of astonishing resolve and terrifying vengeance. But Herodotus wasn't simply reporting facts. He was weaving a story, one part chronicle, one part morality tale. To him and his Greek audience, Tomyris represented the ultimate reversal of imperial arrogance. Cyrus the Great, a man who had conquered half the known world, fell not to a vast army or a rival king, but to a woman who fought not for glory, but for her child. Her victory was almost mythic, and Herodotus treated it as such. He even detailed her grisly revenge, the wineskin of blood, the severed head of Cyrus, and her damning words, "Drink your fill." But was it true? Modern historians debate this endlessly. Some argue that Herodotus exaggerated or even invented parts of the tale, using Tomyris as a narrative tool to humble the Persian Empire, which, at the time of his writing, was still a looming force over the Greek world. Others believe that while the blood wineskin episode might be symbolic, the core event, Cyrus's death at the hands of Tomyris likely did happen. There's also the question of bias. Herodotus, for all his insight, often filtered foreign cultures through a Greek lens. He portrayed the Massagetæ as wild and free, yet noble, an exotic mirror to Greek ideals of honour and liberty. Tomyris, in that frame, wasn't just a barbarian. She was a moral counterweight to Persian ambition. Still, even if details blurred over time, Herodotus succeeded in one thing. He ensured Tomyris would not be forgotten. Because of him, she became more than a historical footnote. She entered the realm of legend, where facts soften but impact sharpens. And in that space between myth and memory, Tomyris's story found a strange kind of immortality. In a world dominated by kings and conquerors, Herodotus left us a queen who refused to kneel, and left her enemies bleeding in the sand. Though she may have slain one of the ancient world's most iconic emperors, Tomyris never ruled an empire herself. She didn't build cities of stone or inscribe edicts on golden tablets. Her people, the Massagetæ, were nomads, living not by walls, but by the rhythms of the land, the sky, and the horse. This meant that Tomyris's legacy was never institutionalized. There were no marble busts or royal coins bearing her likeness, no archives to immortalize her decrees. Instead, her story passed on as stories do on the steppe, through firelight, song, and the whispered awe of warriors. The Massagetæ were one of many powerful tribes of the Central Asian steppes. Their cousins included the Scythians, the Saka, and the Dahai, all expert horse archers who roamed the lands between the Caspian Sea and the borders of ancient China. These tribes were feared by empires for their mobility, unpredictability, and ferocity in battle. Tomyris, as a female leader among them, was rare, but not entirely unique. Steppe culture, unlike many sedentary civilizations, allowed women far greater freedoms. Women rode, hunted, fought, and even led. Among the Scythians, graves of female warriors, buried with weapons, armour, and horse gear, have been found by archaeologists, confirming that the stories of fierce steppe queens were more than just legend. Tomyris stood at the pinnacle of that tradition. Her power didn't come from inheritance or religion. It came from respect, grit, and sheer capability. She was a unifying force among scattered clans, a political leader and a military commander in a landscape where survival meant riding faster, shooting better, and fearing nothing. But because the Massagetæ left no monuments, Tomyris became a kind of phantom queen, her name echoing only in the writings of outsiders and in the oral traditions of the steppe. To the Persian scribes, she was a warning, to the Greeks, a marvel, and to her people, likely a memory carried in bloodlines and battle songs, a ghost who rode with them across the plains. Empires may rise and fall in stone, but the stories of the steppe live on in the wind, and Tomyris, fierce, grieving, and unbroken, became its voice. Centuries passed, and the empires that once surrounded the Massagetæ rose and crumbled. Cyrus's successors built Persepolis, fought Alexander the Great, and faded into the dusty footnotes of time. But Tomyris? Her legend endured, not in the palaces of kings, but in the hearts of those who refused to bow. Across Central Asia, she became more than a queen. She became a symbol of female strength, of resistance, of the untamed spirit of the steppe. In many ways, Tomyris embodied a kind of defiance that transcended geography. She was not Roman, not Greek, not Persian, and so her story belonged to no empire. That made her dangerous and inspiring. In the medieval Islamic world, chroniclers occasionally mentioned her name, reshaped by language but never quite forgotten. In some versions, she was praised for her justice and vengeance. In others, she was seen as a savage queen, a reminder that power in the hands of a woman could be both glorious and terrifying. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, European artists rediscovered her tale through the writings of Herodotus. Painters depicted her in elaborate armour, standing triumphantly over Cyrus's lifeless body. In one dramatic painting, she holds his severed head aloft like a trophy, blood-soaked and victorious. It was theatrical, yes, but also political. These artists were fascinated by the idea of a woman who didn't just survive in a man's world, she won. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Tomyris became a nationalist icon in regions like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Poets and educators reclaimed her as a historical heroine, proof that the roots of Central Asian identity were fierce, proud, and deeply feminine. Her name appeared in textbooks, statues, and even military ceremonies. A woman who had once ruled on horseback with a bow in hand was now riding once more, through memory and myth, through rebellion and pride. In a world that still wrestles with the idea of powerful women, Tomyris remains a challenge. She wasn't perfect, saintly, or tame. She was decisive, brutal when necessary, compassionate only to those who deserved it. She was resistance in human form, and the blood of empire on her hands was a crown she wore without apology. History tends to favour the builders of monuments, the writers of laws, the kings who carve their names into stone. Tomyris did none of these. She left no empire behind, no palace to excavate, no royal seal to decipher, and yet her name still lives, not because she ruled forever, but because she refused to be erased. She stands as a contradiction to how history often remembers women, not as helpmates or footnotes, but as forces of destiny. Tomyris didn't beg for recognition. She took it with blood and fire. She didn't ride behind a king. She rode against one, and won. Her story is retold in classrooms from Central Asia to Europe, not simply because she killed Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to defy him. She wasn't defending an empire. She was defending freedom, a freedom that rode on the backs of horses, that hunted with hawks, that slept under the stars. A freedom that could not be neatly drawn on a map. Today her statues rise from Kazakhstan's capital cities, and her face adorns coins and textbooks. To modern Central Asians, she is a mother of nations, a link to a pre-Islamic, pre-Soviet, proudly nomadic past, a reminder that their identity wasn't born in submission, but in the cry of battle and the gallop of horses. In a world still divided by power, by gender, by memory, Tomyris is a beacon, not just because she killed a great king, but because she taught us something even greater. That dignity is not given, it is seized. That sometimes leadership looks like a mother grieving her son and refusing to let the killer walk away. We often wonder why some names survive while others vanish. Tomyris survived because she was unforgettable, because in a time when women were expected to disappear into the tents of men, she rose, blade in hand, fury in heart, and carved her story into the flesh of history. Empires fall, statues crumble, but legends ride, and somewhere, in the whispering winds of the steppe, a queen still gallops, unbroken, undefeated, and utterly unforgettable. In ancient Egypt, beekeeping wasn't a hobby, it was a state-sponsored science with divine approval. Long before modern apiaries, Egyptians had already developed an organized mobile system for managing bees and extracting honey. By 2400 BCE, beekeeping was depicted in detail on the walls of tombs in the sun-drenched necropolises of Saqqara. It wasn't just about harvesting honey, it was a sacred practice embedded in agriculture, medicine, religion, and even the afterlife. The Egyptians used horizontal clay tube hives, typically stacked in rows and laid on their sides. These were nothing like modern wooden boxes. They looked more like terracotta drain pipes, and they were carefully designed to be relocated seasonally. As the Nile's floodwaters receded and flowers bloomed along its banks, hives were moved up and down the river to follow the nectar flow. This transhumance method was incredibly advanced for its time, almost like ancient GPS for bees. Beekeepers used clay or stone pipes to blow smoke into the hives, calming the bees before honey extraction. Without protective suits, these keepers had to rely on careful timing, experience, and a fair bit of courage. Honeycombs were removed gently, and the honey was collected not just for food, but for medicine, mummification, and sacred rites. Honey was considered a gift from the gods, a divine substance associated with Ra, the sun god. According to Egyptian myth, bees were born from the tears of Ra as they fell to earth. This wasn't poetic fluff. It shaped how the Egyptians treated bees, as messengers between the mortal world and the divine. Honey was used in temple offerings, funerary rituals, and even as a currency in trade. It also had a prominent role in medicine. Ancient papyri list honey as a key ingredient in over 500 remedies, mixed with herbs, wine, or milk to treat wounds, infections, and gastrointestinal issues. Its antibacterial properties were known, even if the science wasn't. Beeswax, too, was harvested and used in cosmetics, embalming, and even in writing tablets. It had value beyond the hive, becoming part of daily life for scribes, priests, and healers alike. In Egypt, the hive wasn't just a source of sweetness, it was a symbol of balance, healing, and celestial order, carefully cultivated under the watchful eyes of both humans and gods. While Egypt gave beekeeping structure and sanctity, ancient Mesopotamia gave it something equally vital: laws. The cradle of civilization didn't just master irrigation, writing, and city building, they also knew the value of honey and the importance of protecting its production. Though Mesopotamian beekeeping wasn't as visually celebrated as in Egyptian tombs, its traces are found in cuneiform tablets and legal codes, suggesting a quietly sophisticated practice. References to bees and honey appear as early as the Sumerian period. In Akkadian and Babylonian texts, there are mentions of ninsur, meaning bee gardens or apiaries. These spaces were often attached to temple grounds or royal estates, suggesting honey production was an elite-controlled resource. Honey and beeswax were used in religious offerings, medicine, food, and trade. And losing a hive could be a serious economic blow. The most telling piece of evidence comes from the Code of Hammurabi, dating to around 1754 BCE. While most of the code is famously devoted to issues like theft, injury, and agriculture, a few lines directly address bee disputes. If someone allowed their bees to swarm into another man's field, and the bees caused damage, they were liable. If honey was stolen, restitution had to be made, sometimes in the form of silver or replacement jars. In a world where almost everything was counted in grain, the fact that honey warranted its own legal protection speaks volumes. Mesopotamians also understood bees as more than just insects. Some texts describe them as divine messengers, even linking them to Ninurta, the god of agriculture and war. Beeswax, in particular, was valued for sealing documents and creating ritual figurines. It was both practical and mystical, part of both bureaucracy and magic. Though the exact design of Mesopotamian hives isn't fully preserved, scholars believe they may have used mud brick or woven basket hives, similar to early Levantine styles. These would have been kept in shaded gardens or rooftops, protected from the harsh summer heat. Mesopotamian beekeeping was less about worship and more about structure, regulating resources, ensuring fairness, and maintaining the economic balance of a society where even a bee sting might end in litigation. Here, the hive was not just a biological wonder. It was a microcosm of order, law, and the civilizing impulse itself. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia, long before the Greeks took center stage, the Hittites were quietly mastering the art of beekeeping, and they weren't treating it like a backyard hobby. To the Hittites, bees were sacred agents of purity, messengers between realms, and essential to both agriculture and the spiritual health of the kingdom. Unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia, where beekeeping was a blend of science and economics, the Hittites took a more ritualistic approach. In religious texts from the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, bees are mentioned not just as producers of honey, but as active participants in purification rites. One famous Hittite ritual text describes a ceremony in which a bee is summoned to go and remove the evil, the impurity, and the wrath of the gods. The bee is then released, not killed, a rare show of mercy in ancient rites, suggesting a deep reverence for the insect. The Hittites valued honey for its taste and its sacred utility. It was used in libations, sacrificial offerings, and anointing rituals, often combined with wine, milk, or grain. Honey wasn't just consumed, it was poured, burned, and blessed. It served as a medium between human intention and divine reception. In terms of practice, evidence suggests the Hittites used clay or woven hives, likely stored in protected enclosures near temples or royal estates. Though the archaeological record is sparse, parallels with neighbouring Levantine and Syrian traditions hint at portable tube-like hives, possibly made from straw and mud, stacked and managed much like those in Egypt. Beekeepers in the Hittite world likely operated under temple control, their work deeply embedded in seasonal festivals and state rituals. Honey was not a mere commodity. It was a tool of diplomacy, healing, and spiritual cleansing. The bee, small and unassuming, held symbolic weight that far exceeded its size. The Hittites also contributed a vital piece to the global understanding of bees. They recognized bee migration. Some surviving texts describe the seasonal behaviors of swarms, linking blooming patterns with honey flow, an insight that shows how closely they observed their environment. In Anatolia, the hum of the hive wasn't background noise. It was a sacred frequency, vibrating through the bones of gods and kings alike. The ancient Greeks didn't just study bees, they admired them, feared them, and modelled society on their mysterious order. To the Greeks, the hive was more than a place of honey. It was a living metaphor, a model for the ideal city-state, a symbol of divine order, and a source of endless scientific curiosity. Greek beekeepers advanced the science of apiculture with a blend of practical knowledge and philosophical flair. Unlike earlier civilizations that used stationary clay hives, the Greeks developed movable terracotta hives with removable lids and sections. These allowed easier access to the honeycomb without destroying the colony, an early step towards sustainable harvesting. They also mastered the art of smoke control. Using ceramic bellows and clay smokers, they would puff smoke into the hive entrance, sedating the bees before honey extraction. This innovation not only reduced stings, but also preserved the hive's structure, allowing for multiple harvests per season. One of the most influential minds in Greek history, Aristotle, studied bees in extraordinary detail. In his Historia Animalium, he described hive behaviour, noting that bees appeared to have distinct roles. Some gathered nectar, others defended the hive, and one, whom he called the king bee, seemed to lead. Although he got the gender wrong, Aristotle's observations laid the groundwork for centuries of bee research. Honey held a revered place in Greek culture. It sweetened wine, preserved fruits, and flavoured cakes. It was also used as a base for medicinal salves, especially in wound care, and was seen as a divine gift. The Greeks believed that ambrosia, the food of the gods, was a mixture of honey and wine. The bee itself had mythological significance. It was associated with Artemis, goddess of wild things, and Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Priestesses of Artemis were even called Melissae, the Greek word for bees. The idea of the bee as a sacred feminine force carried deep symbolic power. For the Greeks, the hive was both scientific marvel and spiritual emblem, a reminder that even the smallest creatures move with purpose, discipline, and grace. In studying bees, they believed they were studying the very laws of nature, and perhaps of the gods themselves. If the Greeks studied bees with wonder, the Romans managed them with ambition. Beekeeping in the Roman Empire wasn't just a cottage industry. It was scaled to match the needs of a civilization that stretched across continents. From the vineyards of Gaul to the hills of Hispania, Rome turned the humble hive into an empire-wide enterprise. The Romans inherited much of their apicultural knowledge from the Greeks and Etruscans, but they expanded it into a formalized agricultural science. Writers like Varro and Columella recorded detailed instructions for building hives, harvesting honey, and relocating colonies. Their treatises describe beekeeping with a startling modernity. including observations on swarm behaviour, seasonal cycles, and pest control. Roman hives came in many forms: hollow logs, cork bark containers, clay tubes, and even woven baskets sealed with dung or mud. Flexibility was key. In colder climates, more insulation was needed. In warmer provinces, ventilation was critical. These innovations allowed Rome's beekeepers to adapt the craft across vastly different regions of the empire. To calm bees, Romans employed clay pots filled with smouldering herbs like thyme or oregano. The smoke soothed the hive, and perhaps added a subtle flavour to the honey. Harvesting was done with iron knives, and wax was separated by melting and straining, later used in candles, writing tablets, cosmetics, and even waterproofing ships. Honey wasn't just food, it was everywhere. It was added to wine to make mulsum, used in baking, in sauces for meat and fish, and even as an early energy source for athletes and soldiers. Roman physicians, following Hippocratic traditions, prescribed honey for sore throats, wounds, fevers, and digestive problems. Its antibacterial properties were well known and well used. But perhaps the most Roman thing about their beekeeping was organisation. Large villas often had dedicated honey farms, run by enslaved labour under the supervision of estate managers. Production was recorded in ledgers, and surplus honey was sold in markets or exported to distant provinces. Bees were viewed not just as insects, but as productive citizens of the Roman economy. To the Romans, a well-run hive mirrored a well-run household, ordered, obedient, and endlessly fruitful. While ancient civilizations cultivated bees for honey and wax, many also saw the hive as a doorway to the divine. Across Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and beyond, bees weren't just insects. They were spiritual beings, buzzing between worlds, delivering messages from gods, and offering sacred gifts like honey that bridged the natural and supernatural realms. In Egypt, bees were directly tied to divine creation. As mentioned earlier, mythology claimed that Ra, the sun god, shed tears that turned into bees upon touching the earth. Honey was used in temple offerings to please deities and accompany the dead into the afterlife. The bee also became a royal symbol. Pharaohs of Lower Egypt bore the title, he of the sedge and the bee, connecting their authority to the cosmic harmony of the hive. In Greece, the bee held powerful feminine symbolism. The priestesses of Demeter and Artemis, goddesses of fertility and wilderness, were called melissae, or bees. These women were considered channels between the divine and mortal realms. The Oracle of Delphi, one of the most important religious centres in the ancient world, was believed by some to have originally been presided over by bee priestesses. Even the famed Pythia, the Delphic prophetess, was sometimes called the Delphic bee. The hive itself was often seen as a microcosm of perfect order, disciplined, selfless, and productive. Philosophers and mystics compared bee society to ideal human society: cooperative, industrious, and reverent. The Stoics admired bees for their instinctive sense of duty. Early Christians would later adopt the bee as a symbol of chastity and resurrection, noting how bees create but do not lust. In the magical traditions of Mesopotamia, bees were invoked in ritual purification. In some Hittite ceremonies, a live bee was released after absorbing the impurities of the community, literally carrying sin away on its tiny wings. Honey and wax were burned in sacred fires, used in crafting protective amulets, and embedded in magical texts for blessings and healing. The bee was more than a metaphor. It was a bridge. A creature that lived in nature's hidden spaces, made golden food without killing, and stung only in defense. To ancient peoples, bees weren't just miraculous, they were mystical. To the ancient world, honey wasn't just delicious, it was divine medicine. Long before bacteria were discovered, people instinctively knew that honey could clean wounds, soothe coughs, and preserve the body. It wasn't magic, though it often felt like it. It was chemistry, centuries ahead of its formal explanation. In Egypt, honey was a cornerstone of ancient medicine. Medical papyri like the Ebers papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, list honey in over 500 prescriptions. It was mixed with milk, figs, garlic and herbs to treat everything from eye infections to digestive problems. When paired with animal fat or resin, it was applied as a salve to burns and cuts. Doctors knew that wounds treated with honey healed faster and resisted infection, likely due to honey's natural acidity and hydrogen peroxide content. The Greeks followed suit. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, prescribed honey for respiratory problems, ulcers, and fatigue. He used honey mixed with vinegar to create oxymel, a tonic used to clear phlegm and reduce fevers. Greek athletes drank honeyed water to boost stamina during Olympic training, believing it restored strength quicker than wine or water alone. In India, the Ayurvedic system held honey, madhu, in high regard. It was classified by taste, source, and medicinal potency. Ayurvedic texts warned against overheating honey, but endorsed it as a treatment for indigestion, colds, wounds, and even poison. It was also used in religious rituals, offered to gods and consumed during sacred fasts for both spiritual and bodily cleansing. The Romans, too, believed in the medicinal power of honey. Pliny the Elder recorded dozens of remedies involving honey in his Natural History. It was a base for ointments, gargles, and laxatives, and even used to treat the wounded after battle. Honey mixed with poppy juice was given as a sedative. Roman surgeons kept it on hand to dress wounds and reduce inflammation. Beeswax had its place in medicine too, as a base for plasters, balms, and even dental fillings. Its malleability and resistance to decay made it ideal for sealing and preserving. In short, honey in the ancient world wasn't just sweet, it was life-saving. It healed the sick, preserved the dead, and symbolized purity. It was the pharmacy of the gods, delivered by the wings of bees. Ancient beekeepers were more than farmers. They were innovators, engineers, and keen observers of nature. Across civilizations, they developed specialized tools and methods that allowed them to manage bee colonies effectively, harvest honey sustainably, and even protect themselves from the bees' defensive stings. One of the most important innovations was the design of the hive itself. The Egyptians popularized the use of horizontal cylindrical clay hives, essentially large terracotta tubes stacked in rows. These hives were durable, portable, and mimicked natural cavities where bees thrived. Similarly, the Greeks and Romans used terracotta and woven basket hives, some with removable lids to allow access to honeycombs without destroying the colony. The ability to inspect and harvest without killing the bees was revolutionary, paving the way for modern sustainable apiculture. To safely extract honey, ancient beekeepers employed smoke to calm the bees. The Greeks invented clay smokers and bellows, designed to direct smoke into the hive's entrance. The smoke masked alarm pheromones released by guard bees, reducing their aggression. Romans refined this by burning fragrant herbs such as thyme or oregano, which soothed the bees and possibly imparted subtle flavors to the honey. Harvesting tools varied. Wooden or bronze knives were used to slice combs carefully. Sometimes, honeycombs were pressed to extract liquid honey, and wax was melted and filtered for later use. Beekeepers often wore minimal protection, relying on experience and careful technique to avoid stings. Suits and gloves were millennia away. Ancient texts reveal that beekeepers also observed bee behavior meticulously. They understood swarm cycles, seasonal patterns, and the importance of moving hives to optimize nectar collection. Some cultures practiced transhumance, relocating hives to follow flowering plants' bloom, similar to modern migratory beekeeping. Additionally, honey storage was a crucial aspect of ancient beekeeping. Egyptians used sealed ceramic jars to store honey, protecting it from moisture and spoilage. Honey's remarkable shelf life was well known, sometimes lasting centuries sealed within tombs. Even the relationship between humans and bees was carefully managed. Rituals were performed to appease bee spirits or gods, ensuring cooperation and avoiding misfortune. This spiritual care was as vital as the physical tools in maintaining a productive hive. In all, ancient beekeeping was a blend of craftsmanship, natural science, and reverence. The tools and techniques they developed set foundations that still influence modern apiculture. The ancient practice of beekeeping laid the groundwork for a relationship between humans and bees that continues to this day. Far from a simple agricultural activity, early beekeeping was an art and science that influenced medicine, religion, economy, and ecology across civilizations, shaping the way we understand nature and sustainability. From the Nile Valley to the hills of Anatolia, from the temples of Greece to the farms of Rome, ancient beekeepers honed methods to protect and sustain their colonies. Their innovations in hive design, smoke use, and seasonal management allowed for sustainable honey harvests, a practice crucial for both survival and trade. The respect they showed for the bees' life cycles helped foster a model of harmony between humans and nature. Their understanding of honey as a medicine informed the early pharmacopoeias of Egypt, India, and Rome, influencing healing practices that persist in traditional medicine worldwide. Honey's antibacterial and preservative properties became the foundation for wound care and remedies, while beeswax shaped early technologies in cosmetics, art, and construction. The symbolic and spiritual meanings attributed to bees and honey in ancient cultures also endure. Religious rituals honoring bees and honey continue in various traditions, reflecting humanity's ongoing fascination with the hive as a metaphor for order, cooperation, and divine blessing. The idea of bees as messengers between worlds or symbols of resurrection permeates art, literature, and folklore across centuries. Moreover, the ancient practice of migratory beekeeping, moving hives to follow floral blooms, is echoed in modern commercial apiculture, essential for crop pollination and global food production. The innovations of ancient beekeepers helped set the stage for today's awareness of bees as vital pollinators and the environmental challenges they face. Despite technological advances, the core relationship remains unchanged. Humans depend on bees for food, medicine, and ecosystem health, and bees, in turn, have shaped human culture, economy, and spirituality since the dawn of civilization. The legacy of ancient beekeeping is a testament to human ingenuity, respect for nature, and the enduring power of collaboration, both within the hive and between species. It reminds us that even the smallest creatures can inspire science, faith, and survival.